I never thought I'd be saying these words out loud, but here we are. Melania Trump has filed for an emergency divorce, not a quiet separation, not a private negotiation behind closed doors. An emergency filing in Manhattan, with the court demanding an immediate freeze on nearly $3 billion in assets tied to Donald Trump's financial empire. And the timing couldn't be more explosive. 3 weeks, that's all it took. 3 weeks into Trump's second term as president, and the illusion of control is already cracking. While the country is still processing his return to power, his own household has turned into a legal battlefield. This isn't gossip. This isn't tabloid drama. This is a financial earthquake. Because when Melania Trump goes to court, she doesn't go empty-handed. She goes with documents, with forensic accountants, with a demand that every asset, every shell company, every offshore transfer be dragged into the light. And then, something happened that made even seasoned observers stop and stare. Warren Buffett broke his silence. The same Warren Buffett who stayed quiet through Watergate, through impeachment, through decades of political scandal. He chose this moment to speak, and when someone like that decides the line has been crossed, you know this story is bigger than a marriage, much bigger. To understand how we got here, you have to understand Melania Trump's role in all of this. For nearly 2 decades, she played the long game. Through 2 presidencies, multiple indictments, impeachments, scandals that would have destroyed any normal political career, she stayed composed, distant, controlled. She didn't rant, she didn't contradict, she didn't explode in public, she observed. During Trump's first term, she mastered the art of strategic silence. During the second, she appeared to be doing the same, showing up when necessary, staying out of the chaos, protecting her image, until she didn't. Because behind the scenes, something changed. As Trump's legal troubles escalated, so did his financial exposure, massive judgments, mounting legal fees, properties at risk, liquidity drying up. And that's when money started moving, quietly, aggressively, and according to the filings, deliberately out of reach. That's when Melania stopped watching and started preparing. She didn't confront him. She didn't argue publicly. She hired one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in New York. She brought in forensic accountants who specialize in hidden assets and offshore structures. And for months, they worked silently. No headlines, no leaks, just evidence. By the time Trump realized what was happening, it was already too late. The filing landed just before midnight, delivered directly to the White House residence. Emergency relief, immediate asset freeze, forensic audits of 17 Trump Organization entities. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer a marriage issue. This was a legal reckoning. And now Donald Trump finds himself trapped in a position he has always feared, forced to choose between protecting his image or exposing his finances under oath. Because this time the opponent isn't a prosecutor, it isn't Congress, it isn't the media, it's the one person who knows where everything is buried, and she's demanding transparency. By the morning after the filing, panic had already spread through Trump's inner circle. This wasn't how things were supposed to unfold. A second term was meant to reset the narrative: strength, control, dominance. Instead, aides were waking up to emergency calls from lawyers, bankers, and donors asking the same question: is this real? It was real. According to people familiar with the situation, Trump's legal team learned about the divorce filing minutes before it became public record. There was no warning, no courtesy call, no attempt at quiet coordination. Melania's attorneys chose New York State Supreme Court deliberately, a venue where filings don't disappear into sealed federal silence. Once it hit the docket, everything became visible. And what immediately stood out wasn't just the size of the money involved, it was the language. Systematic asset concealment, pattern of deliberate transfers, urgent risk of dissipation. Those aren't emotional accusations, those are legal triggers. Within hours, Trump's lawyers were scrambling to reassure the White House that this could be managed. But behind closed doors, they knew the truth. Once a judge sees credible evidence of asset movement during an active divorce proceeding, discretion disappears. And that's exactly what happened. Melania's filing included bank records, wire transfers, timelines, money moved out of joint structures and into entities designed to be opaque. Jurisdictions known not for transparency but for protection. offshore. The court didn't need weeks to react. It needed hours. Judge Patricia Morrison issued a preliminary order freezing transfers from 17 Trump Organization accounts pending a full hearing. No ambiguity, no hedging. A straight-line message from the bench: stop moving money, now. That ruling alone would have been historic. A sitting president ordered by a state court to halt financial activity related to his personal wealth. But the shockwaves didn't stop there. Because inside the Trump family, fear replaced confidence almost instantly. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, the men effectively running day-to-day operations of the Trump Organization, suddenly realized what was at stake. Divorce discovery isn't theoretical. It's invasive. Every transaction becomes a question. Every email becomes potential evidence. Every signature matters. This wasn't just about Melania's share. It was about exposure. A divorce court doesn't care about political optics. It doesn't defer to branding. It doesn't negotiate with slogans. It asks simple questions, repeatedly under oath. Where did the money go? Who authorized the transfer? Why was it moved after the filing? And for the first time in decades, Donald Trump faced a forum where delaying tactics don't work the same way. No rallies, no social media spin, no loyal base to intimidate a judge, just documents. That's when the whispers started. Advisors quietly urged Trump to settle, fast, pay whatever was necessary, make it go away. Every extra day this stayed in court risked turning a divorce into a financial autopsy, but Trump hesitated, because settling would mean admitting something he has spent his entire life denying, that he needed to protect assets from someone who had a legal right to see them. And in Trump's world, that admission is worse than the loss itself. Meanwhile, Melania wasn't backing down. Her attorneys filed additional motions, citing transfers that allegedly occurred after the initial filing, a direct violation of New York domestic relations law. The implication was devastating. Not only had assets been hidden, but court orders were being ignored. That's when the story crossed a line. This was no longer a personal dispute between spouses. It was a confrontation between the presidency and the rule of law in the most intimate legal arena possible. And then came the moment that stunned Wall Street. Warren Buffett spoke, not in an interview, not at a rally, but through a carefully worded public statement, short, deliberate, and impossible to misinterpret. When someone like Buffett chooses to break decades of silence, it's never accidental, it's a warning. And the warning was heard loud and clear. Warren Buffett's statement landed like a controlled detonation. No drama, no names, no emotion. Just 3 sentences and absolute silence afterward. That's how Buffett operates when he wants to be understood without debate. For decades, he had avoided personal scandals, divorces, and political theatrics. He spoke about markets, discipline, trust. He stayed away from people, especially presidents, especially Trump. So when Warren Buffett finally spoke, everyone in finance recognized the signal immediately. This is no longer gossip. This is risk. Boardrooms reacted first. Major donors began calling their advisors. Banks quietly reassessed exposure. Insurance underwriters reviewed clauses tied to Trump-branded properties. The question spreading behind closed doors wasn't moral. It was practical. What happens if a divorce court forces transparency where regulators couldn't? Because that's the nightmare scenario no one wanted to say out loud. A criminal case is adversarial. A regulatory case is technical. A divorce case is relentless. Discovery in divorce doesn't stop at relevance. It follows money wherever it leads. Shell companies, trusts, licensing structures, third-party beneficiaries, family-controlled entities. And unlike prosecutors, Melania's lawyers didn't need to prove crimes. They only needed to prove concealment. That distinction terrified everyone who had ever done business with Trump. Inside the Republican Party, the reaction was immediate and fractured. Publicly, allies dismissed the story as private family matters. Privately, strategists panicked. A sitting president fighting an emergency divorce with asset freezes just weeks into his term was not survivable optics. Worse, this wasn't happening in isolation. Trump was already bleeding political capital. Approval ratings were sliding. Legislative discipline was cracking. International allies were openly questioning stability. Now donors were hesitating, because donors don't fund chaos and they hedge against it. And this chaos had documents. Meanwhile, Melania's silence spoke louder than any interview could. No press conferences, no statements, no leaks from her camp, just filings, precise, methodical, timed, every motion read like it had been prepared months in advance, because it had. According to people close to the process, Melania's legal team had been quietly assembling financial maps since late 2023, long before the election, long before the inauguration. While Trump was campaigning, she was documenting, and that's what changed the balance of power. Trump thrives on improvisation, on pressure, on spectacle. This wasn't a spectacle, this was strategy. By the time Trump understood the scale of the threat, the court already had it. The judge didn't need to speculate. She had timelines, transfers, jurisdictions, and patterns, which meant the next phase was inevitable. Depositions, under oath, no rallies, no truth social posts, no deflection, just questions. And the first one would be the most dangerous of all. Why was this money moved, and why now? Because once that question is asked in a courtroom, every answer creates consequences far beyond divorce. Tax authorities listen, regulators listen, prosecutors listen. That's why Trump's advisors were begging him to settle, and that's why Melania refused. She wasn't negotiating money anymore. She was controlling timing, and timing in politics is everything. By the end of the week, the tone inside the White House had changed completely. This was no longer being treated as a personal matter. This was being treated as a containment problem. Senior aides began asking questions they had never dared to ask before. Not about politics, not about messaging, but about exposure. What documents exist? Who has copies? Which transactions touch federal jurisdictions? What happens if testimony conflicts with past filings? Because once a president is forced into sworn testimony in a civil proceeding, the walls between private and public collapse fast, and everyone knew it. The fear wasn't that Trump would lose money. The fear was that he would lose control of the narrative. Depositions don't care about charisma. They don't care about loyalty. They care about consistency. Dates, numbers, signatures. One wrong answer, even unintentionally, creates a trail, and trails don't stay confined to divorce court. Inside the Republican Party, alarm bells were ringing. Strategists had already been struggling to keep focus on policy wins during the opening weeks of the second term. Now every briefing, every donor call, every media hit began with the same question. Is the president about to be deposed? That single word, deposed, carries a poison that no campaign can neutralize. It doesn't matter that it's civil. It doesn't matter that it's family law. To voters, it sounds like collapse, and donors hear risk. Quietly, money started slowing. Not dramatic withdrawals, not public statements, just hesitation. Meetings postponed, commitments delayed. Let's revisit this after things settle. But nothing was settling. Because Melania's legal team escalated again, they filed motions requesting expanded discovery authority, citing ongoing risk of dissipation and incomplete disclosures. That's court language for we don't believe what we've been shown. The judge agreed to hear it. That alone sent shockwaves through financial circles. Expanded discovery means third parties, banks, accountants, trust administrators, people who don't owe Trump loyalty, people who answer subpoenas. And suddenly, executives who had spent years insisting their relationships with Trump were arm's length realized they might soon be answering questions under oath about deals they barely remembered. That's when panic spread beyond politics. Markets hate uncertainty, but they fear unpredictability even more. This wasn't a policy crisis. It was a credibility crisis, the kind that erodes confidence slowly, then all at once. Meanwhile, Trump's response followed a familiar pattern: public defiance, private fury. He lashed out at advisors who suggested compromise, accused lawyers of weakness, demanded loyalty instead of solutions. But this time, loyalty couldn't fix the problem, because the opponent wasn't a prosecutor, wasn't Congress, wasn't the media. It was a court and a spouse with standing. Melania didn't need to win in the court of public opinion. She only needed to win procedurally, and she was. By forcing transparency, she shifted the entire battlefield. Trump could no longer control what came out or when. Every delay increased suspicion. Every denial invited scrutiny. This wasn't about divorce anymore. It was about whether the presidency could shield personal wealth from lawful inquiry. And the answer so far was no. By the time the weekend arrived, one reality had set in across Washington. This case would not disappear, it would not settle quietly, and it would not stay contained. The question was no longer if it would explode. It was where the blast radius would reach next. By the time Monday morning arrived, there was no pretending anymore. This wasn't a temporary scandal. It wasn't a tabloid distraction. And it wasn't going away with a press statement or a rally. What Melania had triggered was something far more dangerous for Trump than any indictment or political investigation he had ever faced, a process he could not dominate. In politics, Trump thrives on chaos. In court, chaos is a liability. The presidency offers power, but it does not offer immunity from civil law. Divorce proceedings move on schedules set by judges, not by press cycles. Asset freezes don't bend to polling numbers. Discovery doesn't pause for elections or crises abroad, and that reality hit hard. Inside the White House, contingency planning quietly began. Advisors debated worst-case scenarios they never imagined discussing in a second term. What if depositions overlap with international summits? What if financial disclosures contradict prior sworn statements? What if information surfaced that forced parallel investigations? Because once one thread is pulled, others follow. That's the danger of transparency. Trump faced two paths, and both carried consequences he had spent his life avoiding. He could fight. That meant depositions under oath, forensic audits, and a slow drip of revelations that would dominate headlines for months or years. Every inconsistency would fuel new scrutiny. Every evasive answer would invite deeper digging. And every discovery could spill into other legal arenas far beyond family court, or he could settle. That meant paying an enormous sum, conceding ground, and implicitly admitting that assets had been protected from scrutiny. A quiet resolution would stop the bleeding, but at the cost of the myth he built his career on, the unbeatable deal-maker who never loses. There was no winning move left, only damage control. And that's what made this moment different from everything that came before. Trump had survived scandals by overpowering them. He had survived investigations by delaying them. He had survived political crises by reframing them, but this wasn't something he could outshout. Melania didn't need to attack him publicly. She didn't need interviews or allies. She didn't need sympathy. She had leverage, and leverage in law beats power every time. The deeper implication reached far beyond their marriage. If a sitting president could be forced into transparency over personal wealth, it shattered a long-held assumption that the office itself could shield financial conduct from scrutiny. The courts were making something unmistakably clear. Power does not cancel accountability. For voters, this was jarring. For donors, unsettling. For institutions, clarifying. And for Trump, it was the first time in decades that the rules did not bend around him. Whether the case ends in settlement or drags through prolonged litigation, the precedent is already set. The image of invulnerability is cracked. The aura of control is gone. Because once the question becomes what else hasn't been disclosed, it never stops being asked. That's why this story matters. Not because a marriage ended, not because money is at stake, but because it exposed something fundamental about how power, wealth, and law collide in America. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a stress test. And for the first time, the system didn't blink.